It's very difficult to implement a peace agreement, and the implementation process wasn't supposed to begin for a couple of days. They haven't even done the prisoner swap, which wasn't going to be taking place until January. And both sides don't trust one another, particularly the Houthis. In fact, it was reported that the Houthis, while the peace process was taking place, were digging trenches and weren't really adhering to this ceasefire, weren't planning on adhering to the ceasefire. But because both sides have such low levels of trust of one another, until the UN actually comes in and there's an ample force that is there in order to provide security and stability, it's going to be very difficult in the interim period, just because levels of trust are so incredibly low.
But it does seem, doesn't it, that there has been progress towards sort of ending this conflict. The two sides are supposed to be meeting again later in January. I mean, do you see this peace process of even standing a chance?
Well, I think in the short term, there were a lot of promising things that took place just by the fact that the Houthis showed up to the meetings in Sweden. Prior to that, they had refused to even make an appearance out of fear for their own security. So just even agreeing to meet, shaking hands in a very visible way, and agreeing to a ceasefire, agreeing to the prisoner swap, all these things were really promising and really vital.
And there was quite a surprising development as well last week, also on Thursday, that pair of votes in the US Senate, which were basically a massive rebuke to the Trump administration for supporting the Saudi operation in Yemen, also, broadly speaking, supporting the Saudi Crown Prince. And I'm just wondering, do you see those events in Washington as likely to have any impact on the war in Yemen?
No, unfortunately, they won't have a huge impact. They will affect the way the Saudis can wage war in Yemen, in that they're going to suspend the sale of weapons and ban refueling. And the U.S. had been playing a really important role supporting the Saudis. But the Saudis are very autonomous. They do what they want to do when they want to do it. They have all kinds of relationships with other countries, so they're not going to basically just sit and just change their mind based on what the U.S. decided to do. And it's really unfortunate because the Saudis have been really exacerbating this conflict. 60% of the civilian deaths have been due to the Saudi involvement. They've made it much worse. In fact, the whole internationalization of this conflict, with Iran involved, with the UAE involved, has prolonged it, has made it much worse. And so it's really important for the UN to step in and play a much more visible role, just to provide some form of neutral actor that both sides can trust.
Yeah, but doesn't this change the fact that basically, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is sort of an architect of that conflict in Yemen, at least the Saudi involvement in the conflict, and he's become this international embarrassment for a number of world leaders, and increasingly so for Saudi backer number one, the United States. Do you see perhaps some change coming from the inside of Saudi Arabia in terms of its approach to Yemen, or do you think it's just impossible to say?
I do think it is hard to say, and what I see, given the current situation in Saudi Arabia, is that Crown Prince bin Salman has weathered the storm. He showed up to the G20. He was very visible. Although not everybody wanted to meet him or shake hands with him, but he didn't shy away from appearing at the G20 or send in somebody else. He thinks that he has been able to weather this storm because states just rely on Saudi oil so much. And he may change in terms of what they're going to do in terms of how they're waging the conflict, just because the conflict has had huge repercussions on the Yemeni people, and it just created a massive humanitarian crisis. But I don't see there being any shakeup within the Saudi regime itself. And the Saudis haven't really made any kind of announcement that they're going to start to back away from this crisis or, try to be more involved in some kind of peace deal.